Hello everyone and very warm welcome to this webinar. My name is Carl-Johan Björkvall and today we will be talking about how to open a company in Sweden with the aim of providing you an overview of all the necessary aspects you have to have in mind when wanting to establish a company in Sweden. Before handing over to today's speaker, I would like to start by telling a few words about Business Sweden, for those of you who might not know who we are. Business Sweden is a global organization and we operate with local presence in more than 40 markets in 3 regions, APAC, Americas and EMEA. Globally, we are around 500 employees. And in Sweden, we operate here from our HQ in Stockholm, where we also have a close partnership with regional agencies around the country in Sweden, both to be able to reach out to Swedish companies locally and to facilitate international companies to Sweden and the different Swedish regions. For companies looking to establish in Sweden, we can help you to benchmark Sweden as an investment country for finding new opportunities here. And we strive to support investments that have a possibility to create a high potential impact. We can help you to shorten the time to market through making your process of entering the Swedish market as smooth and effective as possible. For example, through providing advice, data analytics, benchmarking, help with site selection, introduction to different stakeholders, and more. We also minimize your risk and guide you through the process of investing and establishing in Sweden. This is, for example, done by guiding you through laws and regulations and practical establishment facts, how to do business in Sweden, as we will do today. We also, on the topic of establishing in Sweden, offer 16 establishment guides on our homepage, ranging from everything how to start a company here to taxes, employing staff, incentives, and more. And these can be found under Learning Center on our homepage. And also, if you have any questions on the topics of establishing in Sweden, you can always reach out to us under invest@businesssweden.se. With that said, I would like to hand over to Felix Dahl, who will be today's speaker and who will tell you more about the process of opening a company in Sweden. So very warm welcome to Felix. The floor is yours.
Hi, and thank you so much. Pleasure to be here and to share some advices and some knowledges about how to set up a limited liability here in Sweden and how you start a company. I think a short presentation with this agenda for today, a short introduction of me as a speaker. We will talk a little bit about limited liability as a company and compare a little bit to a branch office. And we have an overview how to establish a limited liability. And different ways how you can do it and what information you need when you set up a company and you will make the establishment and the registrations. And we will also go through the necessary requirements on each data and each information, how you pay the share capital, the registration process at the authorities, and also in the ending, a short description how you will get registered also at the tax authority and for tax reasons for VAT and so on. And finally, we will have a short summary and maybe if you have some questions. So I think it's possible to write down any questions in the chat here. During my presentation. So if we start with a short introduction and on me, Felix Dahl. I work for a company, Servando Bolag AB. AB is the short term for Aktiebolag, limited liability in Swedish. I've worked in this field for almost 30 years. First as an auditor is at a small firm, a small auditing firm. Then moved on to one of the big four auditing firms. And there worked with legal and economic advices to shareholders and management. And then I moved on to Servando for 20 years ago, exactly now in the beginning of 2003. So I run Servando for 20 years, and our perspective is to help our clients to which are most often shareholders, and we help them and assist them to start companies, to liquidate companies, to merge companies, to make registration changes in Swedish companies, and other legal issues for the company. We are not lawyers who works inside a company. We don't do agreements, and we don't provide legal advices that much. We work in the shelf of the company itself. So we are experts in registration, starting, liquidation, mergers, and so on. And I think we have started, I don't know, 5,000-6,000 companies to our clients. And the experience from these companies I will share today, and the knowledge how to do it. So the topic for today is establishing a Swedish company and focused on limited liabilities, an overview and the rules and some personal experiences. So I think we get started. And the limited liability is, I would say, the most common business form for a company in Sweden. It's also the most acceptable and well known in the market. With that said, it's not the only company form, of course, and of course you could have a good acceptable market acceptance for other companies as well. But most Swedes are they know about limited liabilities, so it's easy to do business with limited liabilities, and everyone knows how it works. If with other company formations, it could be not that the same knowledge from the public. But it also depends on how the big business are. If there's a big business in international business, and you who are listening today, I guess you are interested in international business, and then to establish a branch office is also quite common. But in the local society and the local business market here in Sweden, limited liability is the most common business form. Yeah, so that. And good to know is in Sweden we have a very wide publicity principle. We have a high transparency, so a lot of information, some corporate documents, and all registrations about the company is public. So it's easy to find information about companies. It's easy to share and easy to check up a company. That's good to know, and it's easy. You can just call the authority and get information about another company, or you can always get it send it to you. A limited liability is a legal person, an own legal entity. And when you're an own legal entity, you can be a part in agreements, and you have limited personal liability for the persons who run the company, for the management or the board members. But there is a personal liability, but a limited. If you compare to a branch, a limited liability is an own legal entity, but a branch isn't that. That's a divided part from a group company in another country. So it's not an own legal entity, and when you're not an own legal entity, you can't be a part in agreements. So all agreements with a branch office is done with a group company or the parent company abroad. That's a big difference between a limited liability and a branch office. And that's I guess that's why limited liabilities are more well known and more acceptable, because it's easier for Swedes to know how the Swedish limited liabilities works and who will sign for a limited liability. That could be a little bit more difficult with a branch office because it's a part of another company in another country. And always where there's a difference, it could be a little bit more difficult. But a branch office can also be registered for VAT and has employees, and they have their own accounting, and they file an income tax return every year. So there are specific situations for the branch office as well, there it works on its own. So as I said, Swedes and then Swedish companies are most used to do business with limited liabilities. That's why limited liabilities have the highest market acceptance, I would say, and it's the most well-known business form. That's a short introduction for limited liability and comparing to a branch. And how to establish a limited liability. Then we leave the branch and we focus on limited liabilities. You might know this, but it's the shareholder who established the company here in Sweden and paid the share capital. So the shareholder is the key person or key company. The shareholder shows the management with board members, deputy board members, CEO, managing director, and all the management. The shareholder also decides the business operation, the business objectives, what will this company do, and it's the shareholder decides that, and for the board members to run the business in that way that is decided by the shareholders. And the company is started, and you can start business first after registration. So the registration at authority in Sweden, Bolagsverket, the Swedish name, the Swedish Companies Registration Office, often shorted SCRO. The company needs to be registered before you can start a business. Before if you don't have any registration, you don't have a company and you can't do any business. So that's why the registration process, which we will come to further, is important to do it right and to do it as fast as possible, so you can start a business. That's just a short. We will come back to the process later. That's a short overview. So the shareholder is the key person who decides the ground data and the basic for the company, with management, with operations, and so on. And if you're interested to start a Swedish limited liability, there are different ways to do it. You can fill in forms, fill in papers, and do it totally analog and on your own. That's quite difficult if you're abroad and not used to the Swedish regulations and the contact with the Swedish authorities and so on. It's also possible to start companies in Sweden digitally, but the requirement is that you have a Swedish digital ID, a bank ID, and that means that the most people outside Sweden don't have a Swedish digital ID, of course. So then you could also purchase an already registered company, a shelf company. So there are a lot of agents who sell shelf companies, and then they can also get provide you with all assistance, with all the local contacts, with all the drafting of necessary documents, and be an agent with the authorities through the registration process. So my advice is if you're abroad and you have a company outside Sweden, then it's the easiest way to use a local agent and purchase a shelf company and get assistance with all documents, and you know that you will have fulfilled all requirements. And a shelf company is a already registered company. So the sellers of shelf companies, they have companies on their shelf and are ready to sell. So the registration process is already done in the first case, but after the purchase, you have to change some registrations, of course, because you change board members, you change the business perspectives and so on. But it's a faster way to get started, because the first registration process, which sometimes could take some time, is already done. And if you purchase a shelf company, it's possible to start business, because, as I said earlier, a requirement to start business and run the business is that the company is registered, and the shelf company is already registered. So then you could start a business quite directly, and you could do agreements and run the business based on a power of attorney from the seller of the shelf company. And then you have the registration process to change board members, business perspective, company name, and so on. But in that time you're waiting for the registration, you can do business and make agreements based on this power of attorney. And of course there are a lot of agencies who sell shelf companies, and the price and the service is different from actor to actor, but there's generally a price fee to purchase a shelf company is between 10,000 and 15,000 Swedish kronas, about 1,000 to 1,500 euros if you want to compare to euros. And normally then you get all the assistance, you get all the documents drafted, you get a company purchased, you will get all documents in English, you will also get assistance with tax registration, and that's could be good to look at and ask the agent what kind of service they have. Could they take care of all parts? Do they draft all the documents in English? Normally you have to draft the documents in both Swedish and English with an English translation, because the authorities need Swedish documents and Swedish drafted documents, but as you as a shareholder or management, to understand what you're signing and the documents, then you need an English translation, of course. So that's some ways to start and to start a company here and a limited liability in Sweden. Another way is, of course, to buy an already existing company, but that's another topic. Here we talk about starting new business and new limited liabilities. There are a lot of other issues if you purchase an already existing company with all the legal issues and due diligence questions and so on. So what do you need? What information is necessary to start a Swedish limited liability? I think we could just here you have a list, and it could be good to know that we have two different kind of limited liabilities in Sweden. We have private limited liabilities and public limited liabilities. I will come back to the details and difference between them. As I said earlier, the shareholder is the one who start and appoint the board of directors and so on. So you need to know who will be able to sign on behalf of the shareholder. That could be sometimes quite difficult because it's different rules in different countries. So it's important to have that clear who will sign for the shareholder, because the shareholder need to sign some documents as shareholder to start a company. You have to figure out and have listed who will be the board members. Will you need deputy board members? Will you need or have a CEO in the company? And who will sign for the company? There could be moments where the board members doesn't live in Sweden, then you could need a special agent. And we will come back to all this data. I will just go through the list and then come back to the details of each point. Auditor, all companies doesn't need an auditor. It's limited because based on how big sales and how many employees and so on you are in the company. The name, of course, you have to figure out the name for the company, and the name should always include AB or aktiebolag, which is a Swedish term for limited liability, and AB is of course the short term for aktiebolag. The business scope, you have to be very precise. What will be the business scope for this company? So the board know what business will we run in this company, and it's a shareholder who decides the business scope, and the board have to follow that. So the board can't do any business with outside the business scope. And then you could have then you often want to have a quite wide business scope, but the wider you have, the more complicated you get to get the name registered, because the name can't be mistaken for another company with another name with the same business. You have to think about what share capital you will have in the company. Bigger companies, and if you will do business with bigger companies or public companies, they could require a higher share capital than the minimum acceptable. Financial year, you have to decide what financial year you will have in the company, and you also need a Swedish address. All Swedish companies need a Swedish registered address. So you can't use the headquarters address abroad from Sweden. So you need a Swedish address, and it's possible to buy a service with this address and mail forwarding and so on if you don't have a local office. And you also need the residence where the company is established and have their headquarters normally in Sweden. That's the list of data you need for the registration. And if we go back to all these points and share some knowledges and experiences from each point, then we have the first one with the two separate kinds of limited liabilities, the private one and the public one. The private one is the most common. I don't know exactly figures, but the most companies are private. And public, if you have a public company, then the requirements for share capital is that you have 500,000 Swedish kronor, 50,000 euros, as minimum for share capital, and in private companies it's 25,000 Swedish kronas, 2,500 euros if you translate it to euros. So public companies also have requirements that you need 3 board members. You must appoint a CEO in the company and some other requirements. For the private ones, you have a lower share capital, 25,000 krona, and you could have just 1 board member, and then you need 1 deputy board member, which we'll come back to. So that's the first thing to figure out, and I would say the most companies that we get in contact with are private, and especially if you will establish a subsidiary here in Sweden, then you establish a private limited liability. But in some ways you need a public company, because you will be a part of a big business or big agreements with other big companies who require a higher share capital and a higher equity in the company, so they could trust the company to do business with. Share, as I said earlier, shareholder is you have to, if you don't know, of course you often know that, but it's we meet some problems with international companies to know who is not who is the shareholder, but who will have the right to sign on behalf of the shareholder, because it's different rules in different countries, and as I said, we have in Sweden wide transparency with the authorities, so it's very easy to receive information who will sign on behalf of a company. That's not always easy to find that information for international companies. So to know that the right persons have signed for the shareholder, there you need some registration certificate, and so it could be good to know that you need that information and prepare some registration certificate for the shareholder as well. And then we come to the management, the board members, the deputy board members, CEO. For private limited liabilities, the requirement is you have at least 1 board member, of course. If you have 1 or 2 board members, then you need 1 deputy board member. CEO is optional if you're not a public company, so it's not a requirement that you have to have a CEO, but you need a board member. If you have 3 board members in private limited liability, then you don't need a deputy board member. But if you have 1 or 2 board members, then you need a deputy board member. And a deputy board member is like a substitute in a football game. No responsibility for the deputy board member. It's just register in case of the board members can't do their what do you say? They can't fulfill their role to be a board member, and they get ill, and not a short flu. They get, some people die and you get bad disease and so on, then the deputy board members could step in and transfer to be a board member. That could be good to know. So there are no responsibility as long as you are a deputy board member. And there are some requirements for board members. They have to live in the European Economic Association, EEA, quite the same as Europe and your European Union, but not the UK after the Brexit. So board members have to live in Europe, and half of the number of board members and the half of the deputy board members live in the EEA. So if you have 2 board members and 1 deputy board member. Then one of the board members have to live in the Europe, and the deputy board member, because at least half of the numbers have to live in Europe or in the EEA. So that's a situation we often meet, that you will appoint a British after Brexit, which doesn't work, or you have an board member living in Asia or in America. So the board members have to live in Europe and in the European Economic Association. You can have a special decision from the authority to have another, what you say, dispense. What do you say? The word, I can't find the word, but you could have a special agreement for the authority that makes it possible to even have deputy board members and board members living outside Europe, but it's quite difficult, and you need good reasons why you don't have board members living in Europe. And it's the same rules for a CEO. So if you want to appoint a CEO, then the one has to live in Europe in the EEA. So if you have, say, 1 board member and 1 deputy board member, both live in, for example, in Germany, then they live in EEA, and then it's the requirements are fulfilled, but they don't have any person living in Sweden, then the company needs a special agent for service of process. So then you need a local Swedish agent who will be a contact person for the company, who can forward important message from authorities, from courts, or other legal issues. And there are also possible to buy that service for a special agent. So that's quite difficult, and we often meet questions and have discussions about these topics, about board members, deputy board members, if the company needs a special agent. So that could be good to know. Auditor, if the company, I don't have the exact numbers, but I think it's if you have more than 3 employees, have sales over a specific amount, and if you have a bigger sum for your total assets, then you need an auditor, but first after 2 years. So when you start a limited liability, then it's not necessary for the registration and for the Swedish regulations to have an auditor, but many international companies and for a Swedish subsidiary, they want an auditor because they have audit in their parent company, and to trust the figures and to trust the reporting from the subsidiary, it could be good to have an auditor, and then it would be better to have it from the start and then wait 2 years. As I said, the name, there is quite, we have the registration authority, Bolagsverket, always check the name. You can't have a name who could be mistaken for another company with a similar business. And with 1 million companies in Sweden, it's quite difficult to find a name which aren't used already. So you're more specific the name is, the longer if you have include a group name, personal name, city name or something, and that will be easier to get it registered. You have to decide the business scope. What will be the business scope for this company, and you have a short description in your articles of association. What kind of business will this company provide, and that's for the board members to fulfill. Share capital, as I said, for private limited liabilities, the minimum share capital is Swedish crowns 25,000, and for public companies 500,000. And you can have all share capital is possible over these minimum figures. And regarding a financial year, the most Swedish subsidiary and with international shareholders, they of course have the same financial year as the parent company and the group companies. So it's possible to have a year end on every month end. So you can have a year end in February, March, June, August, whenever you want. But the most common is, of course, the end of December, the end of the calendar year. And a financial year could be how short, it could be 1 day, could be short as 1 day, but never longer than 18 months. So when you start a company, if you start a company now in March 2023, you could have, and you want the financial year end in June, then you could have a longer year than 12 months for the first period. Then you every year will be 12 months, and you could have the year end at which month end you want. And finally, you need a registered address in Sweden, so you can't use the headquarter abroad's address. That could also be good to know and to prepare where should we have the address. And if you don't have a local office, search where could you buy such service for the registered address and an agent who provide and take care of all incoming mails and forward them. So that was the data and the information you need to register and start up a Swedish limited liability. And when you start a company, it's no difference if you started from the beginning or if you purchase a shelf company. You always, as a shareholder, have to pay the share capital, and it have to be paid to a bank within the EEA, the same requirements as the residence for the board member. So the bank should be in the EEA. Of course, the most Swedish companies have Swedish banks, but it could be easier if you are a well-known company in Europe, you have a headquarter in Germany, Italy, Spain, or wherever, then it could be easier to use your local bank where you're well-known and to have the bank in your home country for the Swedish company. That could be faster and easier to get an account in that bank. And that's because of the KYC, the Know Your Client, customer rules, which are getting harder and harder for every year. So the bank, so you probably know, have a lot of investigation and a lot of questions and take a lot of time to open a new bank account, especially for new business and especially for companies with board members or shareholders abroad outside Sweden. So our recommendation is that you very early in the process, when you're thinking of starting a Swedish limited liability, talk to the bank and listen to their requirements. What do they need to open an account for a new company? They often want to know what kind of business will you run, who will be the beneficial owner, who are the board members, and a lot of documentation. They need passport copies and so on. So our recommendation is to talk to the bank very early in the process, so you could prepare all the documents and information they need, so you don't have to wait for the bank later in the process. And as I said, it could be easier if you have a good bank relation to use your international bank in your home country where you have your headquarter and where you operate from and where you are well known. That could be easier because then the KYC process for the bank could be faster. But be sure that the share capital, if you don't use a account with Swedish krona, that it must be at least 25,000 krona. So that when you pay the share capital, so you don't pay to low amount, because then you can't get registered. The share capital has to be at least 25,000 krona. And when you have all this information, you have to register the company and all the details, all the board members, the business perspectives, and the address and all the details at the registration office, the company's registration office, Bolagsverket, the Swedish name. Is, as I said in the beginning, it's a public register, so it's easier to receive information from the register and information about the company. And the registration process differ quite big depending on when on the year do you make the registrations, and how good you have prepared the registrations. So if you have a local agent, it normally works faster because they know the regulations, they know how to fill in the forms, and they have the contacts with the authorities. So it's good to prepare all the documents and prepare, especially if you have board members living outside Sweden, so you have control over the requirements where they live, so they live in the EEA. And another situation, as I said also, is the company name. When we have some problems with the registration and the registration process takes some extra time, then it's depending on the company name, because they won't accept the name and could be mistaken for another company. So the better you have checked the company name, and an agent could assist you with that service and check other names and check if could it be mistaken, and could give you advice how to figure out a good name for the business and the company. Good to know that the most documents could be signed digitally. It's easy when you're abroad. Minutes and other corporate documents could be signed digitally, but the registration form, the application form to the authority, to Bolagsverket, have to be signed with wet ink. So that's one form have to be signed in original and sent by mail to the authority. And when you have registered a company at the Bolagsverket, at the Swedish registration office, company's registration office, then it could be good, and the most companies want to be registered for tax as well. You have separate registrations for corporate tax. In Sweden, we say F-skatt. And you could be registered for VAT, and you could and need to be registered as an employer if you will have employees. So that registration is separate from the registration of the limited liability as a company. Then you have another process at the tax authority to register the company for tax issues like corporate tax, VAT, and employer. Good to know is that If you will sell services or products, you need to be registered for VAT. And with your registration for VAT, you also get a refund on your purchases for VAT. So it's have the both sides. And if you will have employees in the company, then you have to be registered as an employer, and you have to reduce the salaries with tax and to pay in the taxes from the employees, and you also have to pay employee contribution, about 32% of the salary. So that you need to be registered as an employer if you have employees in the company. And normally you do these two registrations, the one with Bolagsverket, the Swedish Companies Registration Office, and the one with tax authority at the same time, or directly after the Skatteverket, after the registration at Bolagsverket. Because you can't start invoicing and then if you don't have a registration for VAT, for example. So that's a good advice to do this both registration at the same time. So then we will come to the end and summarize this. You know, the minimum requirement for a share capital is quite low, 25,000 Swedish krona. And if you start with 25,000, it's possible and quite easy to increase the share capital and the equity with issuing new shares. So you can always start with the lowest share capital, and in the future, if you will have bigger business and so on, increase the share capital and the equity. As I said, AB, the limited liability, is the most well-known and acceptable company formation in Sweden in the market. But it depends on if you're a small local Swedish company, then most of them are limited liabilities, but if you have a bigger business, you work internationally, and you have maybe agreements and deals with authorities, maybe they are more used to do business with branches as well. So it depends on what kind of business you will run. But if you have a limited liability, there are the most acceptable and most common form in Sweden, I would say. And the most efficient and the easiest way to get a company started is normally to purchase a shelf company. Then you have a local agent who are familiar with the regulations and the rules here in Sweden, and you get all the assistance and you get all the documentation that you need, and you can get them both in the legal Swedish text with an English translation in your documents. So that's, I would say that's the easiest way, and because it's you don't have the Swedish bank ID for a digital registration on your own, for example. Involve the bank early at the process, because a few years ago, the bank to open a new bank account was quite easy and quite fast. So you could receive a new account for a few days. This process has been taking a much longer time nowadays due to the KYC regulation for the bank's regulations to anti-money laundering regulations and financing of terrorism. So there is a quite long process, especially if you have board members or shareholders living outside Sweden. So take contact with a Swedish local bank early at the stage, or discuss with your local bank where you have your headquarter and the group company abroad. And of course, a local agent could often assist also here to have some contacts and have a list of the bank's requirements. So it could be good to speak with your agent. What will the bank need in kind of documents and information, and could you have any contact to get a direct contact to the bank? And finally, remember that at least half of the board members, and if you have deputy board members, they as well, the half number of the deputy board members as well, have to live in the EEA, the European Economic Association. So, and if you don't have a board member board member or CEO living in Sweden, then you need a special agent for service of process, which is a legal contact person, no responsibility for the business, but a legal contact person who receive information from authorities, from courts, if you have that kind of issues, and could forward them to the board for their information. So that's what was have to say today. Yeah, I hope you have get some information and some knowledges and some experiences that could be useful in your thoughts to establish and register a Swedish limited liability. So that's me, and thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Fredrik, for very useful insights about the procedure of registering a company in Sweden. We have some minutes left, so I want to see if we have received any questions here in the chat. And we have one question here about how to register a company in Sweden without traveling here.
Yeah, that's possible. If you use the local agent, then the local agent will draft all necessary documents, all corporate documents, that's board meeting minutes and general meetings, application forms, both for the company's registration office and the tax authority. So a local agent will provide all the documents. Normally they will send them, email them, but we work with a digital platform, so we upload the documents. You will log in and get all the documents, and you could sign digitally with digital signings. And if you don't have Swedish bank ID, it's possible to sign with SMS, like text messages or phones or the different kind of signings. So it's possible. You don't have to be here. Some banks want to have a personal meeting, but it could normally you could set up a web meeting and get the explanations and deliver the information to the bank. So normally you don't have to travel to Sweden to set up the company, but sometimes you could use a local agent to set up the company and get started. And I guess if you run a business here, then you will come to Sweden sometimes.
Exactly. Oh, very good. And there was one question here which I found interesting, is that does the same process apply for non-profit organizations if you want to set up a non-profit organization in Sweden?
Yeah, we don't have limited liability. The ground idea is that it is a profit organization, but we don't have different kinds of limited liabilities in Sweden. I know that there is in other countries. So if you want to start an AB, a limited liability, then it's the same process, the same regulations, even if you have a profit idea or not. So it's the same process and the same regulations and the same requirements. So we just have private limited liabilities and public limited liabilities. So there are no difference what kind of business you do in the company.
Right. And there was one question here I saw also about to clarify the bit how much share capital you need. You said in the beginning that sum of 10 to 15,000 crowns. That was more related to the cost of opening a shelf company,
Yeah.
right? And the 25,000 crowns you would need as share capital
Yeah.
in your limited liability.
Exactly. So the minimum requirement is that you have 25,000 as a share capital, but that amount will soon be eaten by cost. So it depends on what kind of business and how you will finance the business. The minimum requirement 25,000, but of course you could have higher share capital.
Yeah.
And our advice is often start with the minimum, and then you could increase later on if you scale up your business and so on.
Yeah. And what about if you want to open a branch office? Do you need any share capital then when registering a branch?
No, a branch office doesn't need any share capital. So it's just a part because the company already exists and by the parent company abroad. So there are just a registration of a business in Sweden, but no share capital and no equity in the branch. So it's just a formation for the business, but the signatories and so on will be in the parent company.
Okay. I have one question also from me. We talked about that board members, for example, they have to live in the EEA. Are there any regulations on where the shareholder can live, or can the shareholder basically live anywhere?
That's a good question. The shareholders can live everywhere, so they can live everywhere, and we don't have any restrictions. So to establish a company in Sweden, we have requirements for the board members, but not for the shareholders.
Okay. Very good. I think with that said, I hope you have gained more knowledge now about how to set up a company in Sweden. If there are any questions that would come up after the webinar, you're always free to reach out to us. Thank you very much, Fredrik, for these insights.
Yeah.
And thank you for listening. I wish you all a pleasant day or evening, wherever you might be.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And good luck with your establishment.
Good luck. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.